The most dangerous man to fall in love with is not the one who cheats, lies, or disappears. It is the one who stays, but never needs. Stay till the end of this speech. Emotional independence is often mistaken for emotional absence because we have been conditioned to believe that love must look like need, attachment, and constant reassurance. When someone does not cling, does not chase, and does not collapse when affection fluctuates, the assumption is that they must not feel deeply. But in reality, emotional independence is not the lack of feeling, it is the regulation of feeling. It is the ability to experience emotion without being ruled by it, to care without losing oneself, and to love without abandoning personal stability. This kind of emotional strength does not announce itself loudly. It exists quietly, grounded, and self-contained, which can feel unfamiliar in a world that equates intensity with intimacy. People who are emotionally independent still feel longing, attraction, and vulnerability, but they do not outsource their emotional survival to another person. Their sense of worth does not rise or fall based on attention, availability, or approval. This is deeply unsettling for those who have learned to equate emotional closeness with dependency. When someone does not need you to feel okay, it can feel as though you are unnecessary, replaceable, or emotionally shut out. But this discomfort does not come from absence. It comes from the loss of control that dependency provides. Emotional independence removes the leverage that insecurity relies on. There is also a profound difference between detachment and emotional absence. Emotional absence avoids connection because it feels threatening or overwhelming. Emotional independence allows connection without desperation. It does not withdraw when closeness appears. It simply refuses to cling when distance emerges. This balance often confuses people who are used to emotional extremes, where passion is expressed through anxiety, jealousy, or fear of loss. Calm presence can feel cold to someone whose nervous system associates love with chaos, but calm is not emptiness. It is safety. Emotionally independent individuals are often deeply self-aware. They understand their emotional patterns, triggers, and wounds, and instead of projecting them onto others, they take responsibility for managing them. This does not mean they do not desire intimacy. It means they refuse to make intimacy the solution to their inner emptiness. They do not seek relationships to fill a void, but to share fullness. And when love is no longer a remedy, it becomes a mirror, reflecting both partners' emotional maturity. This is why emotional independence can feel intimidating. It exposes emotional habits that rely on reassurance, pursuit, and validation. It forces love to stand on authenticity rather than fear. You cannot manipulate someone who is emotionally regulated by withdrawing affection or offering approval conditionally. Their emotional stability remains intact, which can feel like distance to those who rely on emotional reactions as proof of importance. But the absence of emotional volatility does not mean the absence of care. It means the presence of self-respect. When someone is emotionally independent, their love is intentional, not reactive. They stay because they choose to, not because they are afraid to leave. They care deeply, but they do not collapse when love is uncertain. And this is precisely why their presence feels rare, grounding, and confronting all at once. Because emotional independence does not remove emotion. It removes emotional chaos, emotional bargaining, and emotional dependency, leaving behind something far more challenging and far more honest. When love becomes a choice rather than a survival strategy, the entire emotional dynamic shifts from urgency to intention. Survival-based love is rooted in fear, the fear of abandonment, loneliness, or not being enough on one's own. It clings, negotiates, and compromises self-respect to maintain connection. Choice-based love, on the other hand, emerges from emotional stability. It does not rush to secure reassurance or demand constant proof of affection. It exists without panic, without bargaining, and without the silent dread that losing someone would mean losing oneself. In survival-driven relationships, love is often confused with dependency. Affection becomes oxygen rather than enrichment. Attention feels like safety, and distance feels like danger. This creates a cycle where love is performed, not experienced. People stay not because the connection is healthy, but because the alternative, being alone, feels unbearable. When love functions as emotional life support, boundaries dissolve, standards lower, and authenticity erodes. The relationship may continue, but at the cost of personal integrity. In contrast, when love is a choice, it is free from emotional desperation. There is no internal threat driving attachment, no fear demanding constant proximity. Choosing love means remaining present without being imprisoned by the relationship. It means affection is given because it is felt, not because it is needed to regulate anxiety. This is deeply unsettling for those accustomed to survival-based bonding because choice removes emotional leverage. You cannot keep someone through guilt, obligation, or fear when they are emotionally self-sustaining. Their presence is not guaranteed by your absence or your approval. They are there because they want to be. And that truth forces love to be genuine rather than strategic. This shift also transforms conflict. In survival-based love, disagreements feel like threats to attachment. Every argument risks abandonment, so emotions escalate quickly. In choice-based love, conflict does not signal danger, it signals difference. There is room for disagreement without fear of collapse. Emotional independence allows space for honesty without punishment. The relationship becomes a place of growth rather than survival. Love no longer needs to be proven through sacrifice or suffering. It is demonstrated through consistency, respect, and emotional clarity. When love is chosen, standards rise naturally. One no longer tolerates emotional inconsistency, manipulation, or neglect simply to remain connected. This is often misinterpreted as being too guarded or too independent, but in reality, it is emotional discernment. The willingness to walk away from what undermines self-worth does not mean love is weak. It means it is rooted in self-respect. Love becomes an addition to life, not the foundation holding it together. This is why choice-based love feels confronting. It strips romance of drama and replaces it with truth. It requires two whole individuals, not one person carrying another emotionally. There is no chasing, no proving, no emotional survival tactics, only mutual presence. Love becomes something you step into consciously each day, not something you cling to in fear of losing yourself without it. Emotional strength has a way of quietly exposing the insecurities that often go unnoticed in romantic dynamics. When someone is grounded, self-sufficient, and emotionally regulated, they do not respond to relationships from fear or need. They do not chase reassurance, nor do they collapse under emotional uncertainty. And it is precisely this steadiness that can unsettle a partner who unconsciously relies on emotional reactions as confirmation of importance. The absence of volatility can feel like emotional distance, not because connection is missing, but because control is no longer available. In many relationships, insecurity survives on emotional leverage. Affection is exchanged not only as love, but as validation. Withdrawal becomes a tool, silence becomes a signal, and emotional unpredictability becomes a way to test significance. When faced with someone who remains emotionally stable, regardless of these tactics, insecurity is forced into visibility. The usual strategies no longer work. There is no frantic pursuit when distance appears, no overcompensation to restore closeness. Instead, there is calm presence. And calm presence is confronting to anyone whose self-worth depends on being needed. This dynamic often creates a silent imbalance. The emotionally strong partner is not doing anything wrong, yet the other may feel increasingly uneasy. Questions begin to form internally. Why aren't they afraid to lose me? Why don't they react more? Why do I feel less powerful here? These questions are rarely spoken, but they drive behavior. Insecurity does not always appear as jealousy or clinginess. Sometimes it appears as criticism, emotional testing, or the accusation of emotional unavailability. Strength gets reframed as distance to make sense of the discomfort it creates. What is truly being challenged is the belief that love must involve dependency. Emotional strength disrupts this narrative. It removes the reassurance that comes from being indispensable. When someone does not emotionally depend on you, the illusion of irreplaceability fades. This can trigger a deep sense of vulnerability, especially for those who equate being loved with being needed. Instead of feeling chosen, they feel optional. And optionality feels unsafe when self-worth is externally anchored. This insecurity can manifest in subtle attempts to regain emotional control, provoking reactions, creating conflict, or testing boundaries. The goal is often unconscious: to see emotion, to feel impact, to confirm significance. But emotional strength does not rise to these tests. It responds with clarity rather than chaos. This response, though healthy, can feel rejecting to someone seeking emotional intensity as proof of connection. The irony is that the stronger the emotional regulation, the more insecurity is activated in those who have not learned to self-soothe. True emotional strength invites maturity, but not everyone is prepared for that invitation. It asks both partners to meet each other without emotional dependency, without power games, and without fear-based attachment. When insecurity is triggered in these dynamics, it is not because love is absent, but because the relationship is no longer structured around emotional survival. And for those unfamiliar with secure attachment, safety can feel threatening and steadiness can feel like loss of control. Detachment is frequently misunderstood because many people have learned to recognize love through emotional intensity rather than emotional stability. When someone does not react impulsively, does not demand constant closeness, and does not appear emotionally overwhelmed, the assumption is often that they do not care enough. But detachment is not the absence of interest. It is the presence of emotional regulation. It is the ability to remain connected without becoming consumed, to stay engaged without losing perspective. In a culture that romanticizes emotional extremes, calm presence is easily misinterpreted as emotional distance. For those who associate love with anxiety, detachment feels unfamiliar and unsettling. They have learned to measure affection through urgency, jealousy, and emotional fluctuations. When someone remains steady regardless of external circumstances, it challenges the belief that love must involve emotional volatility. Detachment does not mean disengagement. It means the individual does not allow their emotional state to be dictated by every interaction. They care deeply, but they do not spiral when uncertainty arises. This can feel like indifference to someone who expects emotional reactions as reassurance. There is also a significant difference between emotional avoidance and healthy detachment. Avoidance shuts down connection to protect from vulnerability. Healthy detachment allows vulnerability without emotional dependency. The detached individual still listens, still shows up, still invests, but they do not merge their identity with the relationship. They do not monitor every shift in tone or interpret every pause as rejection. This emotional steadiness often creates confusion in partners who are accustomed to reading emotional cues through intensity rather than consistency. Detachment also removes emotional pressure from relationships. There is no demand to perform affection, no unspoken expectation to constantly prove devotion. While this creates space for authentic connection, it can feel threatening to those who rely on emotional feedback to feel secure. When reassurance is not constantly provided through emotional reactions, insecurity fills the silence. The detached person is often labeled as cold or unavailable, not because they lack emotion, but because they refuse to use emotion as a bargaining tool. This misinterpretation can lead to unnecessary conflict. The emotionally regulated partner is asked to prove interest in ways that feel unnatural to them, through heightened reactions, constant availability, or emotional intensity. When they do not comply, the narrative of disinterest strengthens. What is overlooked is that their care is expressed through reliability, presence, and respect rather than emotional drama. Their love is quiet, but it is consistent. Detachment also protects intimacy. By not clinging, it allows desire to exist without pressure. It creates room for individuality within connection. The problem arises when one partner equates closeness with fusion, while the other values connection with autonomy. Without understanding this difference, detachment becomes a projection of fear rather than an expression of emotional health. What appears as emotional distance is often simply emotional balance, misunderstood by those who have learned to equate love with emotional turbulence. True intimacy becomes more intimidating in the presence of emotional wholeness because it removes the familiar roles that many relationships are built upon. When someone is emotionally whole, they are not seeking rescue, completion, or validation to fill internal gaps. This changes the nature of connection entirely. Intimacy no longer revolves around being needed or fixing one another. It becomes about being seen, and being seen without the shield of usefulness or indispensability feels far riskier than being relied upon. In relationships shaped by emotional lack, closeness often develops through mutual dependency. Two people bond over wounds, insecurities, and unfulfilled needs. There is comfort in this shared fragility because it creates predictability. Each person knows their role and the emotional exchange feels familiar. Emotional wholeness disrupts this pattern. When one partner is not emotionally incomplete, there is no imbalance to lean on. There is no silent agreement of, I need you more than you need me. Instead, intimacy asks both individuals to stand equally exposed without emotional leverage. This equality can feel deeply unsettling. When someone is whole, intimacy cannot be earned through sacrifice, overgiving, or emotional endurance. You cannot prove your value by being indispensable. You are valued for who you are, not for what you provide emotionally. This forces a confrontation with self-worth. Without the reassurance of being needed, love must be rooted in mutual desire rather than emotional necessity. For those who have learned to feel secure through emotional dependency, this shift feels dangerous even though it is healthy. Emotional wholeness also eliminates emotional hiding places. There is no room for manipulation, martyrdom, or emotional performance. The relationship becomes a mirror rather than a refuge. Intimacy demands honesty, presence, and accountability. You cannot distract from your own emotional work by focusing on someone else's wounds. This level of closeness requires self-awareness, and self-awareness often brings discomfort before it brings connection. Another reason intimacy feels riskier around emotional wholeness is the fear of being optional. When someone is complete on their own, their love is not guaranteed by dependency. They choose you freely, and that freedom introduces vulnerability. Being chosen is more frightening than being needed because choice can change. There is no emotional obligation holding the connection in place. This exposes a fear many people carry quietly, the fear that without being necessary, they may not be enough. True intimacy with someone emotionally whole asks for emotional courage. It asks you to drop survival strategies and relate from authenticity. There is no chasing, no proving, no emotional bargaining. Connection becomes slower, deeper, and more honest. And honesty requires the willingness to face oneself without distraction. This is why emotional wholeness can feel like a barrier to intimacy, when in reality, it is the foundation of the most genuine connection possible. It strips love of illusion and replaces it with presence, where closeness is not built on fear or need, but on mutual recognition and respect. When emotional wholeness enters a relationship, love can no longer survive at a surface level. The old dynamics that rely on attachment wounds, emotional bargaining, and unspoken power struggles begin to fail. Love is forced to evolve or dissolve. It cannot remain rooted in fear, dependency, or emotional urgency. In this space, love must rise to a higher level, one defined by consciousness rather than instinct, and by intention rather than reaction. At lower levels of emotional connection, love often thrives on intensity. Passion is fueled by uncertainty, closeness is measured by sacrifice, and commitment is reinforced through emotional dependence. These dynamics feel powerful, but they are fragile. Emotional wholeness disrupts them entirely. When one or both partners are emotionally grounded, love can no longer be sustained by chaos. There is no emotional roller coaster to hold attention, no insecurity to trigger pursuit. What remains is truth, and truth demands maturity. At this higher level, love is not about possession but presence. It is not about being chosen out of fear of loneliness, but chosen out of clarity. Both individuals stand complete, not merging to escape themselves, but connecting to expand. This requires a level of emotional responsibility that many are unprepared for. You must communicate rather than react. You must express needs without manipulation. You must respect autonomy without interpreting it as rejection. Love becomes a shared space, not a battleground for reassurance. This elevation also changes how effort is expressed. At lower levels, effort looks like overgiving, overfunctioning, and emotional exhaustion. At higher levels, effort looks like consistency, honesty, and emotional availability without self-abandonment. Love is no longer proven through suffering. It is proven through alignment. Two people move together because they choose the same values, not because they are afraid to let go. Emotional wholeness also introduces accountability. There is no one to blame for unmet emotional needs that were never voiced. There is no hiding behind emotional confusion. Love requires clarity about boundaries, expectations, and personal responsibility. This level of love cannot survive avoidance. It demands courage. It demands the willingness to face discomfort without escaping into drama or silence. This is why many relationships struggle in the presence of emotional maturity, not because love is lacking, but because the version of love being offered is outdated. The higher level does not tolerate emotional immaturity disguised as passion. It does not reward inconsistency or emotional games. It asks both partners to rise, to meet each other in awareness, stability, and mutual respect. Only a love that is rooted in growth can survive here, a love that does not seek to complete, control, or consume, a love that understands that two whole individuals choosing each other is far more demanding than two wounded people clinging together. This kind of love does not burn loudly or destructively. It endures quietly, powerfully, and deliberately, built on choice, self-awareness, and the courage to remain present without needing to be saved.